Julian Vance stood amidst a forest of stolen green, a ghost at a feast of holiday cheer. The Christmas tree farm buzzed with life, a symphony of laughing children, crunching snow, and the distant, cheerful sawing of pine. Strings of colored lights blinked against the deepening twilight, casting a magical glow that felt like a personal insult to the monochrome landscape of his soul. He was a man encased in ice, and all this warmth only made the chill inside him feel more profound. He wore a cashmere coat, the color of charcoal smoke, a silent rebellion against the festive reds and greens surrounding him. His company, Vance Enterprises, towered over the city skyline, a monument to his ambition and his emptiness. He could acquire anything, build anything, command anything, yet here, surrounded by the simple, attainable joy of families picking a tree, he was a pauper. He had come here not out of desire, but out of a hollow, echoing sense of duty to a memory. In the pocket of his coat, his fingers found the familiar, cold edges of a small silver ornament. It was a tiny, intricately carved rocking horse, its polished surface worn smooth by 5 years of anxious, grieving touch. It was Elena's. She had loved this time of year with a fierce, unbridled passion that he had once found baffling and later life-sustaining. This ornament was the first they had ever bought together, a promise of the family they were meant to build, a future that now existed only in the phantom limbs of his memory. His gaze fell upon the tallest, most perfect Fraser fir on the lot. It was a magnificent, flawless specimen, the kind of tree that belonged in a magazine or a corporate lobby. It was the kind of tree he was supposed to buy. It would stand in the corner of his penthouse, a silent, fragrant monument to a life unlived, decorated by strangers and witnessed by no one. The thought brought him no comfort, only a familiar, metallic taste of despair. A short distance away, another world existed entirely. Clara Mayhew watched her daughter, Lily, her heart a painful mix of swelling love and quiet ache. Lily, all of 6 years old, was a vibrant splash of color in a faded, hand-me-down pink snowsuit that was just a little too big in the sleeves. They couldn't afford a tree. Not this year. The rent had gone up, and her waitressing tips barely stretched to cover groceries and Lily's winter boots, but Clara could give her daughter this: the smell of fresh pine, the sparkle of lights, the feeling of Christmas magic, borrowed for an hour. "Look, Mommy," Lily whispered, her breath fogging in the cold air as she pointed a mittened hand. "That one has sparkles on it." She meant the frost, clinging to the needles of a small, slightly crooked Scotch pine. To Lily, it wasn't imperfect. It was enchanted. Clara knelt, wrapping her arms around her daughter's small, bundled form. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. It looks like it was dusted with fairy sugar." Lily giggled, a sound like tiny bells that made Clara's chest tighten. She was doing this for Lily, but a part of her was doing it for herself too. She was trying to remember the joy, to keep the bitterness of their struggle from seeping into the one time of year that was supposed to be about hope. She saw the other families, fathers lifting children onto their shoulders to place a red ribbon on their chosen tree, and she felt a pang of loneliness so sharp it stole her breath. It was just the two of them. It had always been just the two of them. Lily, however, was not one for melancholy. Her world was immediate and full of wonder. Her gaze drifted from the fairy-dusted tree across the snowy path, landing on the tall, solitary man in the dark coat. He was looking at the biggest tree of all, but his face was wrong. It was the face of someone watching a sad movie, not someone about to bring home a piece of Christmas, her little brow furrowed with a seriousness that was far older than her years. He looked lost. Before Clara could even register the shift in her daughter's attention, Lily had let go of her hand. She slipped away, a small pink blur, moving with the silent, determined purpose that only a 6-year-old can possess. She trudged through the snow, her boots making soft, crunching sounds that were lost in the general hum of the farm. She was a small vessel of warmth, heading directly for a continent of ice. Julian didn't notice her at first. He was lost in a memory of Elena, her laugh echoing in his mind as she argued that the best trees were always the ones with a bald spot because they had more character. He felt a gentle but insistent tug on the hem of his expensive coat. He blinked, the memory dissolving like smoke, and looked down. A small girl, her face framed by the pink hood of her snowsuit, stared up at him. Her eyes were wide and startlingly clear, the color of warm honey. They held no deference, no shyness, only a profound and unnerving curiosity. She did not seem intimidated by his height, his severe expression, or the palpable aura of sorrow that clung to him like cologne. She tilted her head, her expression one of genuine concern. "Mister," she said, her voice small but clear as a bell, "your heart looks very cold. Does it need a blanket?" The question was so unexpected, so absurdly, achingly direct, that it bypassed every one of his carefully constructed defenses. It was not a platitude or a polite inquiry. It was a diagnosis. For a moment, Julian forgot how to breathe. A blanket for his heart. The innocence of it, the simple, profound truth of it, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He felt a crack, a tiny fissure in the glacier that had encased his emotions for 5 long years. He could only stare down at her, speechless. He had forgotten what it was like to be seen. People saw his wealth, his power, his name on a building. They saw a widower, to be pitied from a safe distance. No one had looked at him and seen the simple, unadorned truth of his condition. His heart was cold. It was freezing. "Lily!" Clara's voice was sharp with panic. She came rushing over, her face flushed with embarrassment. She grabbed her daughter's shoulder gently. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, sir. She has a habit of talking to everyone. Please, forgive her. We were just leaving." She started to pull Lily away, her apology a flustered stream of words. Julian found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Wait," he raised a hand. "It's all right." His gaze shifted from Clara's worried face back to the small, serious girl who was still looking at him as if he were a puzzle she was determined to solve. He knelt, an unfamiliar and stiff motion, bringing himself down to her level. The cold of the snow seeped through the knee of his tailored trousers. "What kind of blanket?" he asked, his voice softer now. Lily considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. "A fluffy one," she declared. "Like my bunny. And maybe a hug. Hugs are like people blankets." A smile, a real one, threatened the grim set of Julian's mouth. It felt like a foreign muscle twitching back to life. Before the moment could settle, Clara was apologizing again, her hand firm on Lily's arm. "We're so sorry to have bothered you," she insisted, her pride a shield against the awkwardness of the situation. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the faint lines of worry etched around her mouth. She was beautiful, but in a way that was quiet and real, like a wildflower growing in a crack in the pavement. He stood up, brushing the snow from his knee. He looked at them. The mother trying so hard to hold everything together, the child who saw right through him. He saw they had no tree, no red ribbon marking a purchase. He overheard Clara whispering to Lily, "Come on, honey, we're just looking. Remember?" The phrase "just looking" landed in the center of his chest, a small, sharp stone of injustice, impulse, an emotion he had long since suppressed in favor of cold logic, took over. "You don't have a tree," he stated. It wasn't a question. He gestured toward a nearby balsam fir. It wasn't the towering giant he had been staring at, but it was lovely, full and fragrant, about 6 feet tall, perfect for a small apartment. "Please, let me buy this one for you." Clara's back stiffened instantly. "Oh no, thank you. That's incredibly kind, but we couldn't possibly accept." Her voice was polite but firm, a wall going up between them. She was not a charity case. She would not be pitied. But Julian wasn't offering pity. For the first time, he was offering something from a place that wasn't transactional. He was answering a little girl who thought his heart needed a blanket. He looked past Clara to Lily, whose eyes had grown impossibly wide, her gaze fixed on the tree as if it were the most magical object she had ever seen. The silent, desperate hope on her small face was more persuasive than any argument. "It's not a gift for you," Julian said softly, his eyes still on Lily. "It's a prescription. From the doctor." He gave Lily a tiny conspiratorial wink. "For a cold heart. I think she said the cure was one fluffy blanket, one hug, and one Christmas tree. I have to follow her orders." The gentle humor in his tone disarmed Clara. A reluctant smile touched her lips. She looked at Lily, whose face was alight with pure, unadulterated joy, and her resolve crumbled. How could she deny her daughter this magic because of her own stubborn pride? "Okay," she breathed out, the word a small cloud of surrender in the cold air. "Okay, thank you." The transaction was swift and impersonal, but what followed was not. As the farmhand tagged the tree, the practical reality of the situation dawned on Julian. They had walked here from the bus stop. "How are you getting it home?" he asked. Clara flushed again. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. I suppose I would have called a taxi." She avoided his gaze, the admission of her lack of foresight and funds hanging between them. "Nonsense," Julian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My car is here. We'll take you." Before she could protest again, he was already speaking to his driver, who had been waiting discreetly by a sleek black town car. The driver, a kind-faced man named Arthur, nodded and moved to help the farmhand secure the tree to the roof. The inside of the car was another world. It smelled of rich leather and quiet wealth. The silence was thick as they pulled away from the cheerful noise of the farm. Lily pressed her face against the window, watching the lights blur past, while Clara sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap. She felt out of place, an intruder in this silent, luxurious bubble. Julian felt the awkwardness too. He was used to commanding boardrooms, not sharing a quiet car ride with a stranger and her child. He cleared his throat. "It will take Arthur a few minutes to get the tree down and carry it up. There's a small cafe around the corner from your street. Can I buy you both a hot chocolate while we wait?" It was another offer she should have refused, another kindness that felt like a debt. But Lily heard the words hot chocolate and her head whipped around, her eyes pleading. Clara sighed. A quiet defeat. "That would be very nice," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Vance." He had paid with a credit card bearing his name. "Julian," he corrected her gently. "Please." The cafe was the complete opposite of Julian's car. It was warm and noisy, smelling of steamed milk, cinnamon, and damp wool. They found a small booth in the corner, a little pocket of privacy in the cheerful chaos. The mugs of hot chocolate arrived, piled high with whipped cream and chocolate shavings. Lily gasped in delight, immediately dipping her finger into the cream. For a few moments, the only sound at their table was Lily's happy slurping. Julian watched Clara over the rim of his own mug. She seemed to relax on the warmth of the cafe, the tense lines in her shoulders softening. She cradled the mug in her hands, as if drawing heat directly into her palms. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice low. "You have no idea what this means. For her." "I think I do," Julian replied, his gaze distant for a second. "Christmas should be magical for children." He didn't elaborate. He didn't speak of the Christmases he and Eleanor had planned for the children they never had. He didn't need to. Clara saw the flicker of deep, abiding sadness in his eyes and understood that this was about more than just a random act of kindness. They didn't talk much more. Lily filled the silence, chattering about her teacher, her best friend, and her very specific and detailed list for Santa Claus. Julian found himself listening, truly listening. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about stock prices or quarterly reports. He was learning that Lily did not like pickles, that she believed squirrels were secretly spies for Santa, and that her favorite color was the sparkly kind. When Arthur called to say the tree was safely in the apartment, Julian paid the bill, and they walked the short distance to her building. It was a modest, slightly worn brick walk-up, clean, but clearly on the less affluent side of town. Julian and Arthur carried the tree up 3 flights of stairs, the scent of fresh pine filling the narrow hallway. He expected Clara to offer a polite thank you at the door and send him on his way. But when they maneuvered the tree into her small living room, it seemed to transform the space. It filled the room with life and a festive scent that instantly made the apartment feel warmer, cozier. Lily was dancing around it, her eyes sparkling brighter than any of the lights at the farm. "We don't have a stand," Clara said, a sudden look of dismay on her face. "Or any decorations." Julian looked at the bare tree, then at Lily's expectant face. He couldn't leave it like this. "Stay here," he said, already turning to leave. "I'll be right back." He returned 40 minutes later, his arms laden with bags. He had a tree stand, several boxes of simple, classic ornaments in red and gold, and multiple strings of warm, white lights. He had also stopped at a grocery store. He carried in bags filled with food, a turkey, potatoes, fresh vegetables, a pumpkin pie, and a carton of eggnog. Clara stared at him, overwhelmed. "Julian, you can't. This is too much." "I had a meeting downtown that was cancelled." He lied smoothly. "My assistant overordered for the office holiday party. It would just go to waste." It was a clumsy excuse, but it was enough to allow her pride to accept. That evening, something shifted. The three of them worked together, untangling lights, hanging ornaments. Lily directed the placement of every single bauble with intense focus. Julian, the CEO who managed a multi-billion-dollar empire, found himself on his hands and knees, carefully positioning the tree stand and patiently explaining to Lily why all the heavy ornaments couldn't go on the same branch. Clara watched him, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. She saw past the expensive coat and the aura of power. She saw a man who was gentle, who was patient, and who was profoundly lonely. He moved with a quiet carefulness, as if he were afraid of breaking something. When Lily handed him a lopsided paper angel she had made in school to put on the top, he treated it with the reverence of a priceless artifact, securing it carefully to the highest branch. This became the beginning of a fragile, unspoken routine. Julian found reasons to be in her neighborhood. He appeared one afternoon with a box of extra art supplies from a charity drive his company was sponsoring. He showed up another evening with takeout, claiming he was tired of eating alone. He never framed his visits as help. They were always presented as a convenience for him, a way to share a burden. Clara, in turn, began to let her guard down. She started saving him a plate of dinner when he said he might be working late nearby. She let him read Lily her bedtime story, listening from the hallway as his deep, calm voice filled their small apartment. He was a quiet, steady presence in their chaotic little world, a calm harbor they hadn't known they were seeking. He never overstepped, never presumed. He was simply there. One snowy evening, a week before Christmas, they were sitting in the living room, the only light coming from the twinkling tree. Lily was asleep in her room. A quiet intimacy had settled between them, comfortable and warm. Clara noticed Julian's hand in his pocket, his thumb rubbing over something small and hard. "You've been carrying that since the day we met," she said softly, "at the tree farm." Julian grew very still. He slowly pulled his hand from his pocket and opened his palm. The silver rocking horse lay there, gleaming in the soft light of the tree. It looked impossibly sad and beautiful. "It was my wife's," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide from her. "Her name was Elena." He finally told her everything. He spoke of their first Christmas together, of buying the ornament from a street vendor on a whim. He told her how Elena had dreamed of a house full of children, of chaotic Christmas mornings with wrapping paper everywhere. He told her about the accident. It was Christmas Eve 5 years ago. They were on their way to a tree farm, just like the one where he'd met Clara and Lily. An icy patch, another driver going too fast. He had woken up in the hospital. She had not. "I haven't bought a tree since," he confessed, his voice cracking. "I haven't been able to. Being at that farm, it was the first time. I was just going through the motions. And then this little girl came up and told me my heart was cold. He looked at Clara, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She was right. Clara felt her own eyes well up. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell him it would be okay. She simply reached out and placed her hand over his, her warmth covering the cold metal of the ornament and the man's trembling fingers. They sat in silence for a long time, the unspoken grief and the nascent hope filling the space between them. A tiny sound from the doorway made them both turn. Lily stood there, rubbing her eyes, her favorite stuffed bunny clutched in one hand. She had clearly heard some of what he'd said. She padded softly into the room and walked right up to Julian's chair. She didn't say anything about his tears. She just pointed a small finger at the ornament in his hand. "Eleanor is a star now," she said with the unshakable conviction of a child. "She's the big one on top of our tree." She looked from the ornament to Julian's face. "And now you have us." She leaned against his legs and wrapped her small arms around them in a hug, a people blanket. Julian let out a shuddering breath, a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He reached down and rested his hand on Lily's head, in that moment surrounded by the quiet love of this woman and her child. He felt the ice around his heart finally, truly begin to melt. He was not just Julian Vance, the grieving widower, the powerful CEO. He was Julian, and he was part of this. The days leading up to Christmas were a blur of quiet happiness. Julian spent more time at their apartment than his own cavernous penthouse. He helped Clara bake cookies, getting flour on his expensive sweaters. He taught Lily how to make paper snowflakes, his large, capable hands surprisingly deft with the delicate folds. He was rediscovering a part of himself he thought had died with Elena. The part that could find joy in simple domestic moments. He wanted to share his world with them too. Not the corporate part, but the beautiful parts. His company was hosting its annual Christmas gala, a lavish affair at the city's grandest hotel ballroom. On an impulse, driven by desire to see Clara shine, he invited her. "A gala?" She had laughed, her eyes wide. "Julian, I don't have anything to wear to a gala. My fanciest dress is the one I wear to wait tables." "Let me take care of that," he insisted. The next day, a courier delivered a long, elegant box to her apartment. Inside was a gown of deep emerald velvet that shimmered under the light. It was simple, classic, and breathtaking. With it were shoes and a small, understated clutch. Clara stared at it, speechless. It was more than a dress, it was a fairy tale. When he picked her up that night, he was the one left speechless. With her hair swept up and wearing the velvet gown, she was luminous. She looked nervous but beautiful. A jewel suddenly plucked from its humble setting and placed under brilliant lights. "You look," he started, but couldn't find the right word. "Perfect," he finished simply. The ballroom was a glittering spectacle of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, a full orchestra played softly, and champagne flowed like water. It was Julian's world. But seeing it through Clara's wide, slightly intimidated eyes, it felt alien and cold. The conversations were about acquisitions and stock options. The smiles were calculated. He kept her close, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He introduced her simply as Clara, ignoring the curious, speculative glances they received. For a while they existed in their own bubble, dancing a slow waltz, Julian feeling a sense of rightness he hadn't felt in years. Having her in his arms in this place felt like merging two separate parts of his life into a coherent whole. But the bubble was fragile. A man named Marcus Thorne, a longtime board member with a cruel smile and colder eyes, cornered them near the bar. He looked Clara up and down with a dismissive air, then turned to Julian. "Well, Julian," Marcus said, his voice slick with insinuation, "good to see you finally enjoying the holidays. Found yourself a lovely charity case to brighten up the season?" The words, spoken so casually, were a poison dart. Charity case. The phrase struck Julian with brutal force. It painted Clara as a project, a temporary amusement. It cheapened everything: the tree, the dress, the quiet moments in her apartment. But worse, it ignited his deepest, most buried fear. Was that what he was doing? Was he using her and Lily's warmth to soothe his own pain? Was he trying to slot them into the space Elena had left behind, like replacing a broken part? He saw a flash of Elena's face, her smile at a similar party years ago. The ghost of his past rose up, vast and accusing. The guilt, the grief he had been holding at bay, came rushing back in a tidal wave. He was betraying Elena's memory. He was tainting Clara's genuine kindness with his complicated, broken world. His posture changed. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a familiar, icy distance. He muttered a curt dismissal to Marcus and steered Clara away, his grip on her arm now tight and impersonal. She looked up at him, her face etched with confusion and hurt. "Julian, what's wrong?" "Nothing," he said, his voice clipped. "I need some air." For the rest of the evening, he was a stranger. He was polite, but remote. The wall between them, rebuilt, thicker and higher than ever before, the easy intimacy they had shared was gone, replaced by a tense, formal silence. The drive home was excruciating. The luxurious car that had once felt like a cozy haven now felt like a cage. At her apartment door, the silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Clara finally broke it, her voice trembling slightly. "Did I do something wrong? Did I embarrass you?" Julian couldn't look at her. He stared at the scuffed hallway floor, his heart a knot of panic and self-loathing. "This was a mistake," he said, the words tasting like ash. "All of it. We're from different worlds, Clara. This can't work. I can't do this." He didn't wait for her response. He couldn't bear to see the pain in her eyes. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the tiled hallway. He left her, standing in the doorway of her warm, festive apartment, the cold draft from the stairwell washing over her as he disappeared back into the night, leaving her utterly, devastatingly alone. Julian retreated to his penthouse, a sterile sanctuary high above the city. The panoramic views of the glittering skyline offered no comfort. The silence was absolute, deafening. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid burning a path down his throat, but doing nothing to numb the churning in his gut. He had done the right thing, he told himself. He had protected her. He had cut it off before he could hurt her more, before his ghosts consumed them all. But it felt like the wrongest thing he had ever done. He had taken the blanket she and her daughter had offered his heart and thrown it back in their faces. The memory of Clara's shocked, wounded expression was a brand on his mind. He spent the next day in a fog of misery, ignoring calls from his office, watching the snow fall outside his window, each flake a tiny shard of ice. The next afternoon, Arthur, his driver, buzzed up from the lobby. "Sir, a package was left for you at the front desk." "I'm not expecting anything," Julian said gruffly. "The doorman said a Miss Mayhew dropped it off," Arthur said gently. "He said it was important." A flicker of something, hope, dread, stirred in Julian's chest. "Bring it up." It wasn't a package. It was a single, small envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a piece of construction paper, folded in half. He unfolded it. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bright, cheerful crayon. It depicted 3 stick figures, a very tall one in a black coat, a smaller one with long brown hair in a green dress, and a tiny one in a pink snowsuit. They were all holding hands. Above their heads was a crudely drawn Christmas tree, adorned with colorful circles. On the very top of the tree was a huge, yellow, 5-pointed star. Beneath the drawing, printed in wobbly, earnest letters, were 2 words: "Our family." The drawing was not an accusation. It was not a plea. It was a statement of fact, a truth seen through the unclouded eyes of a child. Lily didn't see different worlds. She didn't see a grieving CEO and a struggling single mother. She saw her family, our family. The simplicity of it, The unwavering, innocent belief in it shattered the last of his defenses. He stared at the drawing, and the wall of fear and guilt he had built around himself crumbled to dust. What was he so afraid of? Repeating the past? The past was gone. Eleanor was gone. But Clara and Lily were here. They were real. They were his chance at a future. He wasn't replacing his old life. He was being given the terrifying, miraculous opportunity to build a new one. And he was throwing it away, out of cowardice. He finally understood. Love wasn't a finite resource that he had spent entirely on Elena. His heart wasn't a vessel that had been emptied by grief. It was a muscle, and with Clara and Lily, it was beginning to grow strong again. He was not betraying Elena's memory by choosing to be happy. He would be betraying it by choosing to remain a ghost. A fierce, desperate urgency seized him. He grabbed his coat, shoving the drawing carefully into his pocket. He didn't call. This was not something that could be fixed with words over a phone. He had to see her. He had to fix the damage he had done. He ran from the apartment, not waiting for the elevator, taking the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope. He might be too late. He might have broken her trust completely. But he had to try. He drove himself, ignoring every rule of the road, the city lights a frantic blur. He parked haphazardly in front of her building and took the 3 flights of stairs at a dead run. He stood outside her door, his breath catching in his chest, and knocked. The seconds he waited for the door to open felt like an eternity. He heard the click of the lock, and then she was there. She was wearing an old, soft sweater, and her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. The hopeful light he loved to see in them was gone, replaced by a guarded, weary sadness. Her face was a portrait of the pain he had caused. She started to speak, a quiet, formal, "What do you want, Julian?" But he didn't let her finish. The words poured out of him in a torrent of raw, unfiltered emotion. "I was a coward," he began, his voice rough. "I was a fool. What I said, that was my fear talking, not my heart. I was so terrified of losing someone again, so terrified of not being worthy of the happiness you and Lily showed me, that I pushed you away. I hurt you, and I am so sorry. It was the cruelest, most stupid thing I have ever done." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading with hers. "You're not a charity case, Clara. You are the strongest, kindest, most incredible woman I have ever met. You and Lily. You didn't just bring a tree into my life. You brought life itself back into me. My world wasn't just empty. It was dead. You resurrected it. You resurrected me." Tears were streaming down his face now, unchecked. He didn't care. "I don't care about different worlds. I don't care what anyone thinks. My world is wherever you and Lily are. Please give me another chance. Let me be a part of your family. I love you, Clara. I love you, and I love your daughter. Please, let me come home." Clara stood frozen, tears welling in her own eyes and spilling down her cheeks as she listened. She saw the truth of his words in his desperate, unguarded expression. She saw the man from the tree farm, the man who had knelt in the snow, the man who had gently placed a paper angel on top of their tree. He was back. She didn't answer with words. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. He let out a ragged sob of pure relief and crushed her to him, holding her as if he would never let go. It was an embrace that held an apology, a promise, and a beginning, all at once. Christmas morning dawned, crisp and bright, the sun glinting off the fresh layer of snow that had fallen overnight. The world outside was hushed and white. But inside Clara's small apartment, it was a world of warmth and color and noise. Julian was on the floor, his trousers rumpled and a smudge of chocolate on his cheek. He was wearing a ridiculously festive sweater Clara had bought him as a joke. It had a reindeer with a light-up nose, and he wore it with absolute sincerity. He was surrounded by a sea of crumpled wrapping paper, helping Lily assemble the large, intricate dollhouse that had been her main gift from Santa. He was laughing. It was not a polite corporate chuckle. It was a deep, genuine, unrestrained laugh, as Lily explained, with grave seriousness, that the dollhouse bathroom needed to be right next to the kitchen, in case the dolls have a tummy ache from too much cake. Clara stood in the doorway, a mug of coffee warming her hands, and watched them. Her heart felt so full it might actually burst. This scene, this simple, domestic, chaotic moment, was more beautiful than any glittering ballroom. It was real. It was theirs. Julian looked up as if sensing her gaze, and his eyes met hers over Lily's head. The smile he gave her was full of a quiet, profound love that needed no words. It was a promise of 1,000 more mornings, just like this one. He untangled himself from the dollhouse instructions and walked over to her. He took the coffee mug from her hands, set it aside, and pulled her into a gentle embrace, his arms wrapping around her waist. She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. Together, they looked at the Christmas tree, which glowed softly in the morning light, its branches holding their shared history. Hanging near the top, nestled beside Lily's lopsided paper angel, was a small, gleaming, silver rocking horse, the old memory and the new promise, side by side. Perfect. "We're home," Julian whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. Clara closed her eyes, a contented smile on her face. A single, happy tear slipped down her cheek. "Yes," she whispered back, her voice full of certainty. "We're finally home."